The Bennett family believed they understood power. Their name was etched in gold on the side of Bennett and Company, one of the city's most prominent luxury real estate firms. My father, Charles Bennett, liked to boast that every prime property in the skyline had passed through his hands. My older brother, Thomas, was the heir apparent, a confident, sharp-suited man who inherited my father's charm and arrogance. And then there was me, Clara, the helpful daughter. The one expected to fetch coffee, take notes, and quietly disappear when the real business began. At every board meeting, my father's voice would boom, "Clara, just make sure the projector works, will you?" And Thomas would smirk, leaning back in his chair as if to say, "This is a man's game." I had an MBA from Columbia, graduating with honors, but that credential meant little in my family's eyes. To them, I was better suited for scheduling property tours than negotiating contracts. The breaking point came 3 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday morning. We were finalizing a deal with a high-profile developer, a contract worth over $300 million. I had spent weeks researching zoning laws, running projections, and even identifying a hidden tax loophole that could save the company millions. When the client asked a question about future development risks, I opened my mouth to answer. My father raised a hand without even looking at me. "Thomas will handle that," he said. And just like that, my work became my brother's words. I swallowed my pride, nodding like the obedient daughter I'd been trained to be. But inside, something shifted. That night, I sat in my small apartment, modest compared to the Bennett penthouse, going through every file I had ever touched at Bennett and Company. My pulse quickened as a thought formed: if they won't let me lead here, I'll build something they can't ignore. It wasn't just ambition, it was a quiet, controlled fury. I had been invisible in my own family for too long. Over the next year, I played the role perfectly. I stayed in the company, smiling, taking notes, fetching coffee, while after hours I worked on something entirely my own. I began meeting with silent investors, many of whom had grown tired of my father's domineering tactics. I studied the luxury real estate market's future trends: sustainable skyscrapers, mixed-use developments, green-certified properties, and positioned myself ahead of the curve. Every paycheck I earned from Bennett and Company, I funneled into my new venture. I kept my name off the paperwork, using shell companies and trusted partners to front deals. On the surface, I was still Clara, the assistant. In reality, I was building an empire brick by brick. By year 2, my company, Aurora Developments, had acquired 3 prime properties in the heart of the city. Discreetly, of course, each acquisition was made under holding companies with no trace leading back to me. Meanwhile, my father and Thomas were too busy congratulating themselves to notice the quiet storm forming under their feet. Then came the opportunity I had been waiting for. One of Bennett & Co.'s flagship projects, a luxury high-rise on Fifth Avenue, was in trouble. Financing had collapsed, construction stalled, and investors were getting restless. The very same investors, I realized, were on my contact list. I didn't need to sabotage anything, their arrogance was doing the work for me. One late night, I stood by my apartment window, looking down at the city lights. I imagined my family's faces when they finally realized who had been buying up half their portfolio. The reveal wasn't ready yet, but the trap was almost set. And when the day came, it wouldn't just be business. It would be personal. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in silent endurance. While my brothers were busy securing deals and making appearances at industry events, I was in the back office, crunching numbers, finding patterns in the chaos. Bennett and Company had a branding problem, a supply chain problem, and, though they wouldn't admit it, a leadership problem. Every meeting I attended, my suggestions were ignored, and the credit for my work was casually passed to whichever brother happened to be in the room. It would have been easy to let bitterness take over. Instead, I let silence become my greatest ally. The less they noticed me, the more freedom I had to work. I started building relationships with suppliers directly, bypassing the disorganized channels my brothers swore were fine. I negotiated better rates, streamlined delivery schedules, and quietly built a side network of dependable partners who respected efficiency over ego. Then came the charity gala. Our family attended every year, more for the photographs than the cause. This time, the room glittered with the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers reflected the champagne bubbles, and photographers darted between tables. My brothers arrived in tailored tuxedos, their cufflinks practically screaming money. I wore a simple navy gown, elegant but unassuming. I made sure of it. Halfway through the evening, I slipped away from our table and joined a quiet corner where the true power players were talking, not the ones who made headlines but the ones who controlled them. A venture capitalist I had met months earlier at a logistics conference recognized me and introduced me to two investors who specialized in turnarounds. I listened more than I spoke, but when I did, I made sure my words were precise, informed, and quietly confident. By the end of the night, I had 3 follow-up meetings scheduled, none of which my brothers knew about. At home, my father remained the same, measured in his praise, generous in his criticism. One evening, he told me over dinner, "You're not aggressive enough, Clara. In this business, hesitation is weakness." I smiled politely and let him believe I was still learning. In reality, my hesitation was a strategy. Aggression drew attention, patience built power. Over the next 6 months, I perfected the art of being underestimated. Every time they gave me assistant work, organizing schedules, handling invoices, or drafting contracts, I used it as an opportunity to collect information. I learned exactly which suppliers were unhappy, which clients were ready to walk away, and which deals my brothers had bungled but hidden from my father. And slowly, without fanfare, I began to build something of my own. It started as a consulting arm, just a side project I told the family about, something to practice my skills. In truth, it was a stealth company registered in my name alone. I offered supply chain solutions to mid-sized businesses, using the network I'd cultivated in silence. Word spread quickly among those who valued results over family names. One night, as I was reviewing contracts in my apartment, I realized the scale of what I had created. My client list included companies my brothers had failed to secure. My revenue was climbing steadily. And most importantly, I was doing it without the Bennett name. I knew the time would come when I would need to step out of the shadows. But not yet. The best revenge isn't loud, it's flawless. And I still had one final piece to set in place. The weeks following the gala were a study in contrasts. At Bennett & Company, I was still the dutiful assistant, fetching coffee, taking notes, organizing calendars. My father barely glanced at me unless he needed something. My brothers continued to mock me, their jokes sharper now that Marcus had announced the company's most ambitious expansion yet. It was the same expansion I'd designed 6 months ago, back when I still believed my ideas mattered here. I'd spent nights perfecting a plan that would modernize our supply chain, cut costs by 20%, and open us to new markets. When I first presented it, Marcus had dismissed it as too risky. Now, dressed up with his name, it was suddenly visionary. I didn't call him out. I didn't even flinch when the press release went out. I smiled, congratulated him, and went back to my desk. My colleagues assumed I was resigned to my fate. What they didn't know was that I was weeks away from pulling a thread that would unravel everything. Every day at lunch, I'd step out, not for a sandwich, but for a quick meeting in the marble lobby of a building 3 blocks away. It was there, in the offices of Hamilton and Frost Capital, that I became Clara Bennett, managing director of Aurora Ventures. Aurora wasn't just a fund. It was my weapon. For 3 years, I'd been quietly acquiring undervalued logistics firms, tech startups, and niche manufacturers. All of them, on paper, were unrelated. But together, they formed a fully integrated supply network, one far more efficient than anything Bennett & Company had ever built. I had been careful, hiding my identity behind shell companies and trusted partners. Even my legal team only knew me as Ms. C. Bennett. It was all part of the plan. I wanted my family to look straight at me and still not see me coming. The first true test came on a Thursday morning. Marcus barged into my cubicle holding a file. "Clara, I need you to arrange a meeting with the CEO of Steelworks," he said, tossing the folder onto my desk. "They're a small metal fabrication company in New Jersey. Might be worth acquiring for our expansion. Make it happen." I glanced at the file. Steelworks was already mine. Aurora had acquired them quietly 6 months ago. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone light. "I'll reach out right away." That afternoon, I called my COO at Aurora. "They're circling," I said. "Want me to pull back?" he asked. I smiled. "No, let them make the offer. We'll make sure it's educational." By Friday, Marcus was bragging to our father about the deal he was about to close. By Monday, he was livid. Steelworks had not only rejected the offer but had signed an exclusive contract with a mysterious supplier that effectively cut Bennett & Company out of several key markets. The supplier, of course, was also mine. It was the first move on the chessboard. Each week, another piece fell into place. Competitors suddenly outbid us on critical contracts. Our trusted partners began signing deals with new vendors. Our once reliable supply lines developed sudden, inexplicable bottlenecks. Inside the office, tension grew. My father barked orders more frequently, his voice tinged with panic. Marcus blamed market shifts and unforeseen disruptions. No one suspected the disruptions were deliberate. No one suspected the girl quietly typing in the corner was orchestrating every one of them. Still, I kept my head down. I brought coffee to meetings where men argued over problems I had created. I nodded sympathetically when Marcus complained about the vultures circling our business. Every now and then, I'd catch my reflection in the glass walls of the conference room, perfectly polished, perfectly unremarkable. It was a mask I wore well. Because when the reveal came, I wanted them to feel it, not as a sudden betrayal, but as the moment they realized the betrayal had been years in the making. That moment was closer than they thought. The morning of the Bennett Enterprises quarterly board meeting, the city seemed unusually bright. Or maybe it was just me. I stepped out of the sleek black car, the driver opening the door as if I were royalty. The doorman of the high-rise greeted me by name, Ms. Bennett, a title that felt different now. Not as the overlooked daughter in the corner, but as the largest shareholder of the company. The boardroom was a cavern of polished mahogany and quiet tension. My father sat at the head, flanked by his most loyal executives, their designer suits like armor. Gregory lounged in a chair to the right, legs crossed, projecting false confidence. He barely glanced at me when I entered. "Clara," my father said, voice clipped. "We don't have much time. Investors are nervous, and the expansion deal you've been interfering with needs to be finalized today." I set my leather portfolio on the table. "I'm not here to interfere. I'm here to lead." That earned a few smirks, but I didn't mind. It was almost comical, watching men who had dismissed me for years cling to the illusion that I was still powerless. The meeting began with Gregory's presentation, charts, projections, and an overconfident tone. But underneath the numbers, I saw the truth, gaps, inflated figures, and a dangerous acquisition plan that would drown the company in debt. When he concluded, the room erupted in polite applause. Then all eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, sliding a thick envelope from my portfolio. "I've prepared a counterproposal." My voice was steady, but inside, adrenaline surged. "Bennett Enterprises doesn't need a reckless acquisition. What we need is stability and profitability, starting now." I handed each board member a detailed report, current debt levels, declining brand trust, and evidence that Gregory's plan was built on unsustainable projections. But I didn't stop there. "I've also spoken directly with our top investors," I continued, locking eyes with Gregory. "They've expressed concerns about the company's leadership, concerns I intend to address." My father stiffened. "And just how do you intend to do that?" I leaned forward. "By stepping in as interim CEO. Effective immediately." The silence that followed was almost physical, heavy and electric. Gregory laughed, a short, ugly sound. You don't have the experience." I cut him off. "Actually, I've been running the numbers, restructuring operations, and negotiating with suppliers for months. Quietly, while you were busy planning your vanity project, I was building relationships with every major shareholder. As of this morning, I control 52% of the voting shares." The words landed like a blow. Gregory's face drained of color. My father's eyes widened, shock flickering into something else, pride, perhaps, though he quickly masked it. One of the senior board members cleared his throat. "If Ms. Bennett holds majority shares, then it's her right to appoint herself as CEO. And frankly, given the current instability, I think it's the right move." Voices rose around the table, some in protest, others in reluctant agreement. My father finally raised a hand, silencing them. "If this is your decision, Clara, you'd better be ready to live with it." "I've been ready for years," I said quietly. By the end of the hour, the vote was complete. The title of CEO was mine, not because it had been handed to me, but because I had taken it, piece by piece, move by move. As I walked out of the boardroom, Gregory avoided my gaze. My father didn't. He studied me for a long moment before nodding once, a gesture that felt like both acknowledgement and surrender. The city outside hummed with life, the air crisp with possibility. My phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from allies I'd once been told didn't exist. This was more than revenge. It was reclamation, and I was only just beginning. The following morning, Bennett Enterprises offices were flooded with whispers. The deal had made headlines overnight, Aurora Capital acquires Bennett Enterprises in full buyout. Nobody knew who Aurora's mysterious CEO was, until I walked into the boardroom. Daniel sat at the head of the table, pale and tense. The entire board was present, their chatter dying instantly as I stepped forward. The same uncle who once called me a charity case with a desk job, now looked like he'd seen a ghost. Daniel forced a smile. "Clara, what are you doing here?" "I'm here," I said, sliding my leather folder onto the table, "because I now own this company." Gasps rippled around the room. "That's impossible," Daniel snapped, his voice cracking. Aurora Capital, I interrupted, "is mine. Every share, every decision, every signature, mine." I placed the signed acquisition papers in front of him. "As of this morning, Bennett Enterprises is a wholly owned subsidiary of Aurora Capital." I turned to the board. Effective immediately, Daniel Bennett is relieved of his duties as CEO. The company will be restructured under new leadership, mine. One of the older directors, a man who had barely acknowledged me during my internship, stammered, "You've been running Aurora Capital all this time?" "Yes," I said simply. While Daniel was busy burning through profits and tarnishing the Bennett name, I was building something that would last. Daniel's face flushed red. "You can't do this." "Oh, I can," I said, leaning forward. "Because while you were mocking me for leaving, I was buying up every failing asset you touched. And while you were laughing at the idea that I could lead, I was building an empire big enough to buy you out." He sat in stunned silence, the reality sinking in. I looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. From today, Bennett Enterprises will focus on innovation and integrity. No more nepotism, no more deals made over golf instead of merit. When the meeting ended, I walked out to the reception area, where employees were already scrolling through the morning's headlines. I heard one whisper, "That's her, the new owner." I smiled, stepping into the elevator, knowing the city now saw me not as the forgotten Bennett daughter, but as the woman who reclaimed her family's legacy and rewrote the ending. Because revenge isn't loud, it's quiet, calculated, and absolutely final.